Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I guess I will begin now by reading your bio.
Sure
Um,
thing.
LaTasha N. Nevada Diggs is a writer, vocalist, and performance/sound artist, and author of Twerk, which was published in 2013 by Belladonna. Diggs has presented and performed at California Institute of the Arts, El Museo del Barrio, the Museum of Modern Art, and Walker Center, and at festivals including Explore the North Festival, Leeuwarden, Netherlands, Hikaya Festival, Abu Dhabi International Poetry Festival of Copenhagen, Ocean Space Venice, International Poetry Festival of Romania, Question of Will, Slovakia, Poesy Festival Berlin, and the 2015 Venice Biennial, a much celebrated poet and performer. As an independent curator, artistic director, and producer, Diggs has presented events for BAM Cafe, Black Rock Coalition, El Museo del Barrio, Lincoln Center Out of Doors, and the David Rubenstein Atrium. Diggs has received a 2020 CD Wright Award for Poetry from the Foundation of Contemporary Art, a Whiting Award in 2016, and a National Endowments for the Arts and Literature Fellowship in 2015, as well as grants and fellowships from Cave Canem, Creative Capital, New York Foundation for the Arts, and the U.S.-Japan Friendship Commission, among others. She lives in Harlem and teaches part-time at Brooklyn College and Stetson University.
Thank you, Ra. And I have the pleasure of introducing Ra Malika Imhotep. Ra Malika Imhotep is a Black feminist writer, poet, and performance artist from Atlanta, Georgia, currently pursuing a PhD in African Diaspora Studies and New Media Studies from the University of California. As a scholar and cultural worker, Ra is invested in exploring relationships between queer Black femininities, Black vernacular cultures, and the performance of labor. As a steward of Black studies and Black feminist thought, Ra dreams, organizes, facilitates spaces of critical reflection and embodied spiritual political education through the Church of the Black Feminist Thought and other collaborations. Ra is co-author of the Black Feminist Study Theory Atlas and author of Gossipin', which is scheduled to be published in spring of 2022 by Red Hen Press. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's really an honor to be in dialogue with you as I move towards the beginning of my career in the world as a poet. And I'm just really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for introducing me.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. This is it's nice. It's nice to meet younger poets in a kind of somewhat awkward way. It's kind of awkward. You're like, okay, all right. But then also we're in this virtual space. We're living in a virtual, universe these days. And so the opportunity actually is lovely because we can meet. And because I believe you're on the other side of you're on the West Coast.
Well, right now I'm kind of everywhere. I'm in a nomad moment, so I'm streaming from New Orleans, but I'm based in the West Coast. So it's just through all that time, through all that space, we're able to meet together here right now. And that feels very peculiar and also, like you were saying, lovely.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a question that popped up, right? Icebreaker.
Describe the last time you laughed, and I guess we won't count our little chuckles that we just exchanged.
I'm like, now. You know, well, the last time I laughed was actually earlier today. I had attended a virtual funeral for a friend who passed suddenly. He lived in the UK, and so they had services for him. And after the service, me and a mutual friend got on the phone and we just joked about the brother because we felt also, folks were being so like, oh, he was such a Sufi, he was such a mystic, he was so, and I was like, he was from the Bronx, he could talk shit. He used to wear Milli Vanilli extensions, like we just had a good laugh. We're like, yes, he was those things, but it was also like, we also knew him. We knew a brother from 20 years before, so we knew him in the 20 years younger, that version, which was like, yeah, like we can't forget that version.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you for sharing that with me. I think I wish my last laugh was more heartfelt, but I think it was earlier today. I've been kind of like attending a conference that's been happening online. And I was just like, okay, I'll go to these panels. And I saw the description of someone's work that resonated with like a dear friend and comrade of mine. So I texted him and I was like, oh, you should go see this. I'm excited. And we get there and then they introduce the person and the person comes up on the screen. And the paper was like about like Black queer performances that deal with like death and like reimagining relationship to death. And I kid you not, when a white man came on the screen, I just bust out laughing. And I had to text my friend, like, and the work was still brilliant, but that was definitely my last laugh. Just the shock of all my, like, everything I expected just being completely upended in the way that the Academy tends to do.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You know, it's funny. The Academy has its surprises. I mean, and some of them are not really surprises, right? It's just like that's how it goes. And in some of it, you look and you're like, well, of course, who would be dealing with this topic,
Yes.
in depth, right? But then you
Yes.
also have to wonder, you have to, do that little digging to see just how in depth have they been, like how long they've been in it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because it's
Mm-hmm. And
almost, mhm.
yeah, it also raises questions and feelings for me about like, I think as a person who traverses multiple worlds, as a poet, as a scholar, as an organizer, it's interesting to be both like someone who studies and someone who is part of a community that is studied. And so to think about my relation, like, or the sight lines between these like Black queer artists who are re-envisioning their relationships to death through these DIY punk aesthetics, and then to understand that as a particular relationship, and then understand the relationship between the scholar and that same thing, but as an object of study, is just a completely different mode of relation. Um, and I think it's always a treat to remember, or treat is not the word. It's always an experience to just remember how many different ways there are to be Black in the world,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
study, to be studied, to be in community, to be protective of community. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, like, again, it deals with this with the individual scholar, and just what space are they coming from. And I think,
mhm,
because we have, a lot has changed, which is great. Um, and then there and then there are those allies, right? Like since that's the word of the day, allies. There are those allies that have been in the mix in the family for 50, 60 years, and uh and that their work is still work that you know we cannot deny. Because it's just like it became almost part of the skeleton of the architecture that we would eventually be building ourselves. And it's like, okay, yeah, you know yeah. Okay, what was this question?
Okay,
Name
Sankofa Talk. Name
name
3 things you are striving for in your poetry.
you answer that.
Oh, I feel like I wanted to chew on it for a little bit, but or maybe can we go like 1-1-2-2? Like, can we like volley it back and forth?
Let's try it. Yeah.
Well, one thing I'm fighting for that maybe feels like the most explicit thing I'm striving for in my poetry is to like articulate my body's truths, whatever that is at any given moment, but to tell the truth of both like the things I've experienced in this body and the things I've inherited by virtue of being in this particular Black, feminine, Southern, African descended body in this moment in time.
Okay. One thing that I strive for in my poetry, I'll say the easiest one, the quickest one, fun. Um, mm, uh, that with the work that I'm doing within the poetries that I'm exploring, whether it's something that's deeply personal or something that is global or something that I'm trying to convey, um, that has to do with us as a species, regardless of the procedures or whatever madness that I'm concocting. I need to find a point in which it's fun, even in the most scary. That I have some fun with it. That I'm able to either laugh, like a big hearty laugh, like, oh, that's so stupid, or a big hearty laugh, like, I can't believe you wrote that. Like, did you just write that down? So fun. Okay, your turn.
Yeah, and I'll just say quickly that I definitely got some big and small laughs sitting with your work, twerk over the weekend. So thank you for that. And I think that another thing I strive for in my poetry is pleasure. And I'm saying that in like multiple senses, but also just in the sense of regardless of what I'm writing about, like the pleasure of language, of like sentences that just sound, it's just like, ooh, yes, like that feeling of like the music in words, the lyricism in words, and even just like the like familiarity. Like I love in my own poetry and in the poetry that I read when like the languages I know or the languages I am familiar with are just presented in ways that are like delicious. Like just like, oh yes, that is how my people talk. And it is poetic. Like you better remind me how good that sounds. Yeah.
Okay, my turn. What are 3 things? Oh, these are such lofty questions. The meaning of life. Uh, oh, y'all pick me. What 3 things? What is another thing I saw? avoiding being precious. And let me explain that. I think in the more recent work, that it's more personal work. I think it's very easy to be precious, to write in a mode that's very sweet and tender to a topic that's the opposite. And we do that to protect ourselves. We do that as a type of guard. Um, um, and one of the things that I'm really striving for in the recent work is to avoid um, making any situation precious, or making anything that if the topic needs to go there, the topic will go there. Um, I've oftentimes I find myself reading a handful of specific works by women poets like Akila Oliver, like Dawn Lundy Martin, like Claudia Rankine's Into the Alphabet, specifically Into the Alphabet. And Akila's She Said Dialogues and Dawn Lundy's Discipline, because there's something in the terrifying and the personal. They're activating without minus what I believe we, having feminine bodies, may quickly shy away from. You know, we're not supposed to say things like that, especially, right? But I'm already toying with the fact that two of these women are queer and one of these women are cis, but how they approach the subjects in those books, I'm studying. I'm studying. They're good homework. They're good homework on how to go there and how to go there stylistically, right? Because I think they do some wonderful things with words, with language, but what they're writing about is not easy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I'm taking that as homework. Because I'll say that my third thing of what I feel that I have strived for in like earlier poetry, and specifically even in this manuscript, this book that's about to come into the world next spring, has been relief in a way, like reckoning with the truths of my body, as I was saying earlier, and wanting to express or hold or offer or experience some modicum of relief, even if it's not temporary, even if it's not forever. And I think something that I feel, or an invitation that you just helped me articulate for myself, is that there are I guess less precious or more I don't know. Maybe I won't say less or more, but there are just other modes of truth telling that I think I'm excited to explore now that I've like done this very particular variant of personal political relief work. I'm curious and excited now to explore different valences. And I think that everything you just said just like hit me. It was like pew pew pew. So I'm really excited to study in that direction and really push myself in that direction as a writer also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm thinking about that word relief that you just said. And I'm making a mental note of that. Um because this year has been all about relief, right? Or the lack of relief, or the lack of access to relief, right? Um, and that relief is still determined upon how much money you were making before you needed relief. Um, um, a third thing, um, just taking risks, just going there. Um, uh, I could write in my journal, which is pretty straightforward and what have you. But then it's like, okay, what is the composition, and what do I want to do with it, um, on the paper? Uh, is there something sonic I'm looking for, or something visual I'm looking for? But overall, to always be about taking a risk. So it's like, have fun, get dirty, take
Mhm.
risks. Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, it's show and tell time.
Show and tell. Dude.
Who's up first? Who shows and tells to begin?
I don't know. Dun, da, 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 dun, 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 dun.
Oh, it's you. It's me. It's me. Okay.
Okay.
So funny because it's like it's unmoderated, but we're in a very particular dance with technology. Um, so I'm gonna read a poem and then show a photo and talk about that photo.
Okay.
Uh, let me get my poem where it needs to be, or it's actually on my screen. So I'll just do that. Okay, this poem is titled "Home is a Mouthful of Spit for Your Tender Heart." 1. The humidity moves into my skin and breaks up all my English. The words start dripping from one to the next. Seem like my tongue get fatter when I'm back home. Won't move round fast enough, can't pick up the right syllable, just lounge around my mouth, pulling up too thick saliva. I spit out the side my face, like all the niggas I used to watch pose around the corner store and all the niggas that came before them who shot craps against that same wall, talking shit like it's syrup. A young black thing, pretty like me, walk by and that spit turned to steam, creep up the back of thighs that wouldn't normally be exposed this time of year. But this a Georgia winter, and when my mama first moved down here, Sagittarius as she is, they barbecued on her birthday. All that New York just melted away and her English started to break too. Soon she started to moving like them Augusta women her folks ran north to get away from. 2. In the kitchen, we laughed through a joke about how I'm sounding like I'm back on somebody's plantation, and she let on that she noticed, but say that whenever I do decide to speak English, I speak it good. So good, she turned to dictionary trying to follow where I'm going. Say, I be using them words in new ways with new folks' rules, then come home and melt all them semantics down into something slow and sloppy, and in my voice, I remember stories that ain't all the way mine. 3. How everything I know about sound and poem come from up out red clay and get stuck underneath my tongue. How we wash the headstones white with our mouths full of laughter. And ain't that how we mourn? How my daddy's sister used to keep dolls on her bed just like I do. And ain't that how you put beauty to rest? How they used to fill cuts with cobwebs. And ain't that where all the wisdom come from? How spit is good enough medicine for anything on the surface. And ain't that why it pull up at healing time? Thank
It's
you.
lovely. Lovely.
Thank you.
Oh man. Oh,
Oh.
And there's the image.
Yeah,
Okay.
and this is an image, and you can't really see it because it's small, but oh, there we go. So this is a photo from a recent burlesque performance. I performed what I consider to be Black feminist storytelling, but using the gestures and aesthetics of burlesque and neo burlesque. I recently got to perform as part of the What the Funk Burlesque Festival in Seattle, which was all Black Indigenous people of color, all performing the funk music. And I put together an act called Not Any Longer, to the sounds of the Lajadu sisters, so some like Afro funk. And I also created some text in a sense that didn't necessarily, like, I didn't speak it, and who knows if it was even read, but I wrote this poem onto this head wrap that was my first reveal. And it says, once upon a time, a soft Black bitch got sick of shrinking themselves to fit a mold cut by white supremacist, heterosexist, capitalist patriarchy. Finally unable to ignore the festering wound they had become, the softest, blackest bitch in all the lands declared, no longer will I compromise my wants, needs, desires. No longer will I deny the magic of my own tongue. No longer will I cower in fear of my own light. Um, so yeah, there's some affirmation prose burlesque fusion stuff.
That is great. Like, it's like, uh, I'm, I'm pausing because, um, I'm, I'm, I'm just, I'm, I'm loving it. I'm loving it, and also, I mean, it's making me think a lot about a writer who is, I don't know what this person is doing. She was a playwright as well as a poet, and she was a local of. She was from originally from Texas, and her name is Tish Benson. Um, and she had one book that came out, but what makes me think a lot about her, um, uh, when you speak, especially when you speak about the talk and how the talk changes and how your tongue gets fat, right? Um, she was one who, I mean, the Texas was thick in her
Mm-hmm.
talk, and she had a book called Wild Like That. Good stuff,
Mm-hmm.
smelling strong. you know, and and I mean, if you could find it anywhere, grab that book, because I
Mm-hmm.
think it's also the things of, there's the the conversation of, like, yeah, she talked real good, right? But also, but like how, like you said, that uh you know someone would say, um you sound like you just got off the plantation. And I mean, it makes me think of Tish. It makes me think of How to Tame a Wild Tongue by Gloria Anzaldúa. Like, I'm like wondering, like, has anyone ever, I mean, Gloria has had, there's, she was a Chicana writer. And so it's coming from that perspective, but it's like, like, how do you tame a fat tongue? You know, or like, it's like you don't, you know? Um, um, but then it immediately made me think of Anjanou Ellis, the
Mhm.
actress. And she wrote this op-ed, um, um, about her mouth.
Mhm.
which was just like, and she was like, the mouth being Mississippi.
Mhm.
Um, and she
Mhm.
was like, my town is in Southwest Mississippi, only miles away from where the Mississippi River spills into the Gulf of Mexico. I was curious about this convergence and wondered, did it have a name? It did. It's called the mouth. I love this. The mouth. I live in the mouth. A mouth
Mhm.
that calls and curses my name and
Mhm.
responds to those calls and curses with constant return. I can't quit. Even though living there here means being in permanent battle with the Confederates, even though living here is a decision to be artistically needful and yet needing nothing. The mouth, the land, they
Mhm.
rule me,
Mhm.
right? And and it goes on and on and on to like unpack this mouth, right? So
Mhm.
that's what I think about hearing your work.
Wow, thank you for that. I'm just yes. I'm just full of yes and excitement.
Oh, okay, here we go. 1952, Penny wasn't pulling no wagon. 1942, Penny wasn't pulling no wagon. Shit. 'Penny wasn't pulling no wagon.
Mm. Mm. Wow. I know you have a photo too, so I'm hesitant to start talking.
What you're seeing are largely hand stitched words in Cherokee. The stitched on just cuttings of denim old denim used jeans, old jeans. And the particular stitch I'm using is called a chain stitch. So they're hand sewn. The words are, that's Suli for buzzard, Ayaspo for me too, Aya, which I can't remember right now. um, and
Mhm.
I started working on this summer, thinking about how one retains a language. How can it be retained through this process of sewing? Thinking about sewing as a particular labor, um,
Mhm.
a labor that was relegated to women. Um, uh, of course, it could possibly move into quilting, but then the significance of quilting in Native American cultures as well as African American cultures.
Mhm.
And so these are just some of the words. 52 Hertz just refers to the whale. Um, um, and you could look that up. Um, and just kind of, Nahina, how about you? Uh, Ochloli, Ochloi, I can't remember right now. Um, yeah, so these are the words uh, that I wrote typed. Donkedeoli, I believe that means is I'm going to come back. I'm coming back. Um, so that was stuff I started working on this summer. Video is an excerpt of a larger piece called Penny Wasn't Pulling No Wagon. And I was commissioned to do that for a program called 100 Years, 100 Women for the centenary anniversary of the Voters' Right which gave women the right to vote.
Mhm.
Um, it also gave Black people, but we know what happened. Um, um, in any case, when I was commissioned to do it, I had another idea, and then the pandemic happened. And during
Mhm.
the pandemic, I was very mad. Um,
Mhm.
and I also thought a lot about how the focus, they invited many, many women, as they should have, to participate in it. But, largely when you think about it and you think about the suffrage movement, you think about these white women immediately because of the documentation. And this is, again, not to take away from what they did,
Mhm.
because when you find out that their march in Washington was then bogarted by men who were absolutely incensed with them marching and attacked them, you know,
Mhm.
you're if you're not a human to have some sort of empathy towards that. At the same time, um, I thought about the women from whom, like especially the Haudenosaunee women, for whom they got this knowledge about equality from. I
Mhm.
also thought about the Black women who were just as much invested in the call and were pushed to the back of
Mhm.
the march, if they were to march, you know. Um, the fact that they insisted on Ida B. Wells not to march alongside them, but then, there's a first wave and a second wave of that suffrage movement. Um,
Mhm.
and still, there are those women who could not participate, whether they wanted to or not, because
Mhm.
they were the maids.
Mhm.
They were the washerwomen.
Mhm.
They were the sugar tits.
Yes.
You know, these women like my mother who were, yeah, no, they weren't pulling a wagon symbolically, the mule, because they were pushing a wagon, because
Mm.
they were still having to work while other women went and attended these demonstrations. And so I wanted to acknowledge their labor,
Mhm.
their presence, even though they're not, the women you first think about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No. Oh my God. That is so deeply felt and brilliant to me. I think a lot about the ways that um Black women's labor through every period or wave, if you want to describe like feminist consciousness in the North American context, like Black women's labor has been like both the like condition of possibility for these consciousnesses, and Indigenous women's labor has been the condition of possibility for these moments of consciousness raising and expanding, and have persisted to have their own drives towards their own understandings and practices of freedom.
Mhm.
um, so I think that the work that you just shared, and I've been thinking of you since encountering your work as a language artist. So seeing the ways that you created this like visual art practice out of language practice just feels so deeply resonant with the work that your poems are doing always already. And I'm just really grateful to get to see both these sides of your practice. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So this was one of my questions for you. Do you consider yourself a part of any particular creative lineage? And if so, like, how would you describe it? Who your people is?
Oh, my people says. Um, I think I am a part of multiple creative lineages. Um, um, it's one, and this might be the answer for something else later on. I am born and raised in New York, so I'm a New Yorker. And there's a particular lineage of creators in New York, from New York, um, that I find myself inspired by, and also at the same time learning hard lessons from them. But, to kind of paraphrase something that Carl Hancock Rooks said, your heroes never did this, right? Meaning that sometimes your heroes were hot messes, you
Mhm.
know. And so it's like I'm not trying to be a hot mess, you know, but I also appreciate their work and the work that their legacies. Um, I definitely I am the child of a woman from the South. Um, and even though there's not a lot of writers that I like hone in immediately into with the South, aside from Nikki Feeney, um, because I am the child of a Southern woman, not a Southern child. So the sensibilities are both urban, but at the same time Southern in its yes ma'am, no sir. That I still to this day do that. I can't call an elder by their first name. um, you know, um, and then I am also the child of a Black woman and the child of a Native woman, a woman who was Black and Native and poor.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't necessarily search for that type of work, but I hone in work that deals with that.
Mhm.
Um, I try at best to study it.
Mhm.
Um, but in terms of lineage, like direct people, I would say Edwin Torres, Puerto Rican poet from the Bronx, who deals with identity and not. Jane Cortez, a one of the pioneers during the Black arts movement, a poet as well as a musician and band leader. Um, uh, I I I believe I'm in conversation uh, with her work, with some of her work, not all of it, um, because she was a stout activist. So
Mhm.
she's also did a lot of stuff, but also in her mission to found organizations that were dedicated to women of the African diaspora.
Mhm.
Um, and her organization, the stuff that she would organize, um, I feel I am in a lineage with. And then I feel that I'm in lineage with a lot of folks that didn't give a hoot about identity. You know, they just did stuff. They just did wild stuff. And I think they're just as important as those whose work was heavily about politics, about revolution, about progressiveness, about women, about blackness, about nativeness.
Mhm.
There are those who were like, I'm not in that headspace. I just like doing, and I'm like, you know what? It's cool because I like this stuff, you know, and I think I find inspiration from that just as much as I find from the other angles.
Mhm. Thank you.
Hmm.
Mm.
That's a question for you.
Oh, joy. What does hoodoo and bottle trees mean to you? Wow. I consider myself a student of hoodoo and bottle trees, and I think they are signifiers and practices and homes that call to me. I think like I've been always mystified by bottle trees even before I knew what they were. And as I get more learned, and it's this interesting thing where it's like you see something when you're young and you're like, I don't know what it is, but I want to be by it, or I like that it's here. I want one of those. Then you learn what it is in kind of like a brain sense. And then you start to like feel what it is in a spiritual sense. And
Mm,
so I think of both hoodoo and bottle trees as these southern inheritances, these like southern inheritances that reach towards like a black cosmology that is about way more than the geography of the US South.
mhm,
But I think they are signifiers of that black cosmology, that call towards me, that sometimes I feel like are waiting for me to just wise up. That sometimes are just literally before me, mystifying me. There are things that I'm drawn to in other work, whether that's like poetry or film, or like there's signifiers, there's language in hoodoo and language in a bottle tree. um but yeah, they're relics. They're like spiritual objects and signifiers that are near and dear to my being.
lovely.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
Uh-huh. It was something like, you know, very quickly. looking at your work, and it was just. And then I went back and looked at it, and I was like, "Did she say hoodoo?" And I was like, "No, she didn't say hoodoo." He was like, and I was like, "Why did hoodoo come up?" And I was like, "This is it." I was like, "Okay, this. Let me ask her." You know.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think that it's an element in the work, 'cause particularly like the gossiping work is very much about like a certain type of like communion with ancestors, with spirits, with like um with both like maternal and paternal spirits. But I think because it's about this kind of like otherworldly communion, a lot of the language or a lot of the ways that the different voices in the collection speak carry
Mm,
hoodoo with them.
mm,
And then I think I'm endlessly inspired by Julie Dash's Daughter of the Dust, which is like, one of the, if not the, like my friend was saying the other day, it's canon. Like it's just like a master text in Black independent cinema and like really challenging like form, really like letting like a care, like a gaze full of care really sit and linger with a very distinct kind of southernness, a very distinct kind of Black femininity. And I think that also inspires me and has shown up in my like aesthetic approach to the poems in this collection.
okay.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's them telling
Ooh,
us we did it?
that's it. Da, 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 da.
No, but thank you so much. And I'm really like walking away with some assignments. I got some things to go find. I got some things to read. I got some encouragement to not be so precious, or to kind of disabuse myself with the need to feel like I got to produce something precious. Uh,
Mhm.
and I'm just continually grateful for all the ways that you weave words and like have like really inspired something in me with the way how we can use languages plural in relationship with
Yeah,
each other and provide and refuse translation. Like
yeah,
I'm really into it. I'm really
mhm.
into
Yeah, and that, and like I said, that comes from that lineage of folks who are like, "I don't care."
yeah.
I don't you know? You
Follow
know?
me or not. This is where we're
Yeah,
going.
yeah, like, yeah, follow me or not, I don't care. Like Gloria's Ansel do is like, I will speak in Spanish, I don't care. Coincidentally, Spanish is a colonial language, but where's what she was trying to say was very, clear. But also, I mean, it's funny. Kate didn't pop up. I'm going to keep on talking, Kate, because I do feel that I need to answer this question, and it was the question having to do with what do you think are some of the misconceptions? That's right. That's right. she's like, she's like, okay. So what's a misconception your generation has about mine, Ra? And what do you think that is?
That I love how you're like, I need to answer this question, and now you talk. Uh, um, I think that there is perhaps like a willful amnesia. I think for some reason people have not read and taken seriously. It's like people are really into the types of cultural work that was happening in the 60s and 70s. And then like we kind of skip the 80s and 90s, and then we narrate sometimes that as like an apolitical time or a time when people weren't taken to the streets. And I think that that's, or not, and even if it's not just politics, or that was a time when like, I don't know, like nothing worth returning to was happening. And it seems like I'm just becoming more and more aware that that's just not true. And maybe we just got to catch up. Maybe like, a couple years ago people wasn't studying the 70s and now they are, and maybe soon in a couple years people will be taking the 80s and DC as spaces of like radical and transgressive work happening, a bunch of different
Hmm.
fronts. I think
Mhm.
one misconception that comes to mind is that wasn't a radical cultural work or a radical politic being pushed by Black and other colored artists in the 80s and 90s, when like there absolutely
Yeah,
was.
and it's not true. Tish Benson is one of those. That book, Carl Hancock Ruck's Pagan Operetta, um, the anthology that was edited by Kevin Powell and Ross Baraka, In the Tradition. I mean, there were those who were committed to the book, right? Who were really thinking about these things during the 90s, like you said, who don't get it doesn't get there was Roll Call, edited by Tony Medina and Samia Bashir, as well as Tony Medina's books. There's another woman, her book was called Juba, that I thought about when you started talking about hoodoo. Now, these books I'm pointing out also are books that were not on major publications, right? Which is how, you know, you don't have those conversations about those books because nobody knows they exist, right? Third World Press was still publishing folks in the 90s. There was the Outlaw Bible, some weird, wacky anthology. There was Aloud, right? And Aloud probably, was the Nuyorican Poetry Cafe anthology, edited by Miguel Algarin and Bob Holman. These are like collections that did appear in the 90s. As well, there were albums, the Sekou Sundiata's albums that were on Mercury Records. There was Mike Ladd, who then later becomes more affluent in the hip hop producing and hip hop. There were several compilations, spoken word, right? And I say this because, and I know people get salty with me because I say spoken word, not slam, right? And because I also feel that there's a gap in the narrative, in the timeline, where we jump from the 60s and the 70s, then there's no mentioning of anything, maybe, but only those that have publishers, major publishers, not smaller publications. And then we go to slam, and it's like there's all of these people, like, and the type of language, we love the conversation. 5 minutes more. Okay, so my thing, the misconception that I think your generation has about mine is that we're snooty. No, we're not snooty. It's that we don't want to talk to y'all, and it's like, no, it's not true. We haven't met each other. We just met each other. That's about it. Or the misconception that we're not there to help, and it's kind of like, well, the question is exactly what do you want help in, right? I think sometimes the need for advice turns more towards publications, more towards publicity, and then the social media landscape, which I'm part of, but that wasn't my thing because it wasn't there back then. Is also that it's kind of like, just don't think about that. Just continue writing, continue saying fuck you, continue taking risks, continue having fun, continue playing with language, and think about the publication later on. Like, just let yourself live and experience the work, and what it needs, and what the work needs from you. Let it cook, let it simmer. Like a professor told me, if your first book comes out at 43, it's okay, and it was okay. So I think sometimes the misconception that I feel sometimes I have about your generation is that y'all feel like y'all have to be now, 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 now. And I'm like, I don't know if that's necessarily true for all of y'all, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I know we're at time. I could literally go on, but I think that you're right, and I think that the things are connected, because if we have forgotten the 90s, then we aren't accessing our folks who was writing then to
Mhm,
just be in relation, to study, to talk, we and
mhm,
it is like a very production thing focused because of social media. But I am very grateful for all the invitations you've given, and I honestly, I'll say permission to me and anybody else watching
mhm,
to just be with your work,
mhm,
to relate to the work and to the world of word workers differently,
mhm,
and
mhm.
I'm really grateful that we've had this chance to talk.
Me too, me too.
All
Thank
right.
you.
And thank you to the CCCADI for putting us together.